Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you're suitably refreshed again after a nice cup of tea. And welcome to those who are joining us for the first time at our online UK Stroke Club conference. As many of you know, this is a very different event, but we hope you're finding it useful and uplifting. For those of you just joining us today, just a few pointers around how this session is different to maybe other online meetings you're used to, like Zoom or Skype. So you won't be able to see each other's faces on the screen, and you won't be able to speak directly to us or to each other. But as Anne said, please do use the chat bar, and anything after the conference, do email us, clubconference@stroke.org.uk. We heard from Neil and Nick yesterday on our approach, how we can resume face-to-face meeting when it's safe to do so. Bringing together large groups of people at the moment from different households is not something we're doing, and we won't start doing it until early next year, depending on government guidance. So this next session is really focusing on our road to recovery by adapting to this new normal. We've just seen an incredible session, all your innovations during the last 6 months, writing to members, phoning members, doing online exercise sessions, singing. So many things are happening, and we need to really harness that and understand how we can do more of it and support you better. So over the next hour, you will hear from Ruth and Helen, two researchers who are helping us to address some of these challenges that remote support brings. So I'd like to welcome Ruth, a research fellow at the University of Exeter, who is going to give us a bit of background to some of the work she's been supporting us with and what we found out from you so far. Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. I also wanted to note that I have had slight issues with my camera today. So if I'm appearing fuzzy, it's not you having tech difficulties, it's probably just me. But yeah, so thank you, Beth. I am Ruth Lamont. I'm from the University of Exeter, and I'm a research fellow there. The association back, oh gosh, it must have been a year ago now, asked us to get involved with helping to look a bit more into how the stroke groups are working. And so many of you will have taken part in a first survey with your groups back at the end of last year. And to be honest, I was so impressed with how much support we got for this survey and how helpful all the group leads were in facilitating that. I can't thank you enough for getting your groups involved. And then since then, we've had to adapt what we're doing in terms of research to ask questions about lockdown, because we thought that would be helpful for the Stroke Association to find out more about what's going on during this lockdown period and how stroke group members are faring. So you also helped us with this survey, so thank you very much for that. And overall, we had an amazing 236 people take part in this survey. And these individuals were from all the different groups, well, not all the different groups, 109 different stroke groups. This was across the different regions and geographical subzones. And we want to just thank you for taking your time to share this, but also for those individual members that took the time to sit down and complete this survey. And I wanted to share a few insights that we got from the survey. So starting off, we asked a little bit about whether people would, when people would feel comfortable to meet again. And only 14% of respondents said they would not meet with their stroke group again until a vaccine was found. So that's quite encouraging and suggests that people are really keen to get back together again. But they wanted very strong safety measures in place. And I'm not going to discuss that anymore because, as Beth mentioned, Nick and Neil did a session yesterday on face-to-face recovery, and that will be available online for you soon. And so I wanted to focus on some of the other insights that respondents allowed us to gain from doing the survey. So beyond this, the survey helped us to find out how members have kept in contact during lockdown. And they told us that phone calls were the most common way they were keeping in contact, but also that email, text messaging and Zoom were being widely used too. So it's great to see this many different formats being used. The group leads and other volunteers were really widely praised for the way that they've been keeping in contact with group members and doing kind of keep in touch calls. And so just a real well done for that. It really came out in the findings. However, the survey did show a bit of a mix of some people feeling very supported and other people who hadn't been in contact with their groups at all. And so that's something that needs to be considered. So moving on, we then asked them to reflect on how things could be improved in the event of a future similar situation, or just with things going forward now. And although the leaders were making great contact with the group members, it was noted that the member-to-member contact could be improved. And people said things like, I would have kept in contact with people if I'd had their numbers. And it was suggested that we could introduce a buddying system so that we're ready for another crisis. Many people said that they would just like more contact, and they often mentioned phone calls as a good way of doing this. So that's maybe to think about the frequency with which we contact each other. And finally, we have to remember that the group of people that responded to this survey were largely online, and so this may be reflective of that, but they thought that we should continue to improve the way that we connect digitally. They recognise that many members are not able to do this or don't want to do this, and they aren't online. So it's about thinking about how we help those who want to use technology to connect with others in this way. So Beth noted that the Stroke Association has created guidance for you to connect members in a way that complies with data protection laws. And so if you go to the club and group resources page on intranet, you can find this guidance. And I just wanted to say this is just a sample of some of the insights that we've taken from the survey, and we'll keep group leads updated with any other summaries we have and anything we publish, so that you can share it with your groups. And since completing the survey, we've shared these insights with Reason Digital and with the Stroke Association, and they'll be looking at how they can be used to help groups further. And so now we've got Helen Stevenson, who's Head of Partnerships at Reason Digital, and she's going to come and share some of their work with us now. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ruth. So I'm Helen, and I work for a social enterprise based in Manchester called Reason Digital. And we help charities with their digital needs. So I've been working with the Stroke Association for the past month on this project. And it was focused on gathering insight and learnings from volunteers and members throughout the lockdown period, and the new ways that some of the groups met or supported each other online. And as you'll have seen from the previous session today, there was lots of really creative ways that people did this. But we know that online meeting isn't the same as face-to-face, and that it can never replace the human connection that you do get from going out to meet somebody for a coffee or maybe going on a trip with other people. And there's plenty of barriers to meeting online. But for some people, there can also be barriers meeting face-to-face. So you might live far away from where your group meets, or you might not have very good transport to get there. Maybe you've got a really busy life and you can't find the time to squeeze in a face-to-face group. And part of this project was understanding those challenges a little bit more. And over the last 3 weeks, I conducted 30-minute telephone or online interviews with 18 leaders, members and staff from the Stroke Association. And I wanted to understand their experiences of lockdown and if they met as a group And if they did, how did they do that? And we wanted to see if we could take those learnings from lockdown and have face-to-face and online groups meeting in the future. And the really important thing is that this isn't about replacing face-to-face meetings, but it's more about giving members and volunteers more choice about where and when they do meet. And on the next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we found out from the interviews. The key thing for me that really stood out from everybody that I spoke to was how this was a really incredibly challenging period for everybody. Through the interviews, one of the first things that we found was that there were some groups that didn't meet or communicate as a group at all during the period. And there was lots of different reasons for this. But the most common reason was that volunteers and members couldn't access these online groups. Some of them didn't have internet or broadband in their house, so they couldn't get online. Another common issue was having the right devices to get online, because we know that not everybody has a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone. Then the next reason was around confidence. Not everybody trusted the safety and security of online groups, and following closely behind that was not having the skills to do so. All of a sudden, there was all these new systems that we could use to meet online, but for a lot of people, they'd never been shown how to use them. And this was especially difficult for those that lived alone or were shielding, and their friends and family couldn't come round to their house to talk them through how to use it. And then finally, lots of volunteers themselves are recovering from a stroke. This meant that they struggled using some of the online tools, or they needed extra help using the online system. So all in all, it was really, really hard. But as you can see from the next slide, it wasn't just the groups that couldn't meet online that had challenges. For those that were able to meet over Zoom or created WhatsApp groups, it wasn't all plain sailing, unfortunately. Lots of challenges were identified, such as it was really difficult to bring new members into online meetings. And because of lockdown, they weren't able to meet one-on-one and introduce them slowly to the group. Another challenge was actually getting the online groups set up and having members attend regularly. I heard from my interviews that some members needed a lot of reminders about the new meetings and when they were happening. And this took up a lot of time for volunteers. And as we can all tell by the session today, meeting online as a group is really different than meeting face to face. When you meet up with like 10 to 20 people in real life, you don't usually find yourself having one conversation as a group. We naturally tend to break off into smaller conversations amongst ourselves. But this is really difficult to do on Zoom and to do online. So some of the volunteers found it really hard to keep the conversations moving and making sure that everybody got a turn to speak and that some group members potentially didn't speak too much. And then the last challenge was motivation. So how could volunteers keep the sessions fun so that people still wanted to come week after week or month after month? And on the next slide, you'll see some of the ideas that we came up with as part of this project to address these challenges. And we did a really fun workshop with staff from the Stroke Association and some of the volunteers who have been running online groups to come up with some ideas. And the first idea we had was around training to run the groups. And in the early days of lockdown, there was a lot of guidance produced for how to use the tools like Zoom and WhatsApp. But there wasn't so much guidance produced around chairing meetings, around bringing people in who might be quiet, around introducing icebreakers and keeping the sessions fun. The next idea that we had was creating a list of people who are really skilled at online facilitation that you can ask to come and join your group. There's an example of a group based in the south of England who actually got actors to come and facilitate their groups. And these actors used to read to people in hospital recovering from a stroke. And the group volunteers found that this made it a lot easier for the group leader to contribute to the discussion and not feel like she was having to run it herself. And that's one of the beauties of being able to do things online. Our geographical boundaries kind of melt away. So that was a really interesting idea. Another one was providing more activities for groups to run online. At the start of lockdown, Zoom quizzes were all the rage, but slowly they got a little bit samey and a little bit boring for people. So this idea was about producing and providing some pre-packaged activities that volunteers could really easily run with their groups. And finally, a closer partnership with AbilityNet. They provide help and support for people that have had a stroke to get online and to use online tools. But perhaps we could be a bit more proactive in pushing that support to the people that need it. So some really great ideas had come out. And on the next slide, we're going to talk through a couple of the things that are going to happen very, very soon. So one of those is around sharing the stories and successes of volunteers that have been doing some really brilliant things to provide you with some ideas and inspiration. And hopefully you got a lot of that from the previous session today, and we want to continue pushing that on. The next is around supporting groups to access different sources of funding in order to buy the equipment that's needed for volunteers and groups to meet online, as well as the ability to set up and run with other areas in your region so that you can share the responsibility for organising and running groups with other volunteers. And finally, put you in contact with those people that have been running groups themselves, providing you with some peer support. So now I'm going to hand it over to Sophia, who's going to explain some of the things that you as volunteers can do on the road to recovery.
Thanks so much, Helen. Hello, everyone. I'm Sophia, and I am the volunteering coordinator for the Central Zone. And now we're going to look at some of the kind of things we can do, that we can implement, that we've just been speaking about. So the first point I'm going to make is to keep talking to your members. So we recognise that lots of people do not have the confidence, the skills, or the equipment to access online activities. So you may well have had conversations with your members at the start of lockdown to find out what they are comfortable using. But what we would advise is for you to keep having those conversations. We've all experienced a world of change, and people's motivations could have changed too. And with more local lockdowns happening, people may be open to trying digital technology as a way to reduce isolation and stay connected with other stroke survivors. So my next point is about sharing AbilityNet's details. So we have this national partnership with an amazing organisation called AbilityNet. And AbilityNet supports people of any age living with any disability to use technology to achieve their goals at home, at work, and in education. They provide specialist advice services and free information that can help people get online. So we've had volunteers at AbilityNet support some of our groups with a 6-week programme, and they've also helped people on an individual basis too. So if you think this is something your members could benefit from, then do get in touch. And Anne is kindly going to put their website link into the chat bar, as well as their free helpline number. Okay, so moving now on to aphasia guides. So we have a new guide for people with aphasia, which was developed with people with aphasia, researchers, as well as speech and language therapists. It includes information on how to get online safely, set up an email account, and learn how to download apps and more. So we recommend, where possible, to ask for support and work through this guide with a family member or a friend. You can download the guide on your device or even print the full guide or part of the guide at home. We also have videos on My Stroke Guide to help work through this, which will be available at the end of September. So individual group members can also order a printed copy through our online store or by calling the helpline on 0303 3033 100. And again, Anne will kindly put the links for all the things that I've just mentioned onto the chat bar. Now moving on to support with grants. So just as a reminder, or in case you weren't aware, the Stroke Association offers grants to anyone who's had a stroke. So in recent months, there has been a massive increase in people applying for grants for things like laptops and tablets, as well as many other things that can support people with their life after stroke. So do encourage your members to phone our helpline and find grants that they can apply for. If your member already has a relationship with the Stroke Association coordinator, then you can ask them to get in touch to talk about our Life After Stroke grants. We know many of you applied for grants already through our local grants, like to the council or local businesses. So if you have done anything like that, do share your success stories in the chat bar. Nothing brings things to life like hearing real life examples from you guys. There's also another organisation which I want to mention called Turn to Us. Now, I've used Turn to Us when I was a stroke recovery coordinator, and it's essentially like a grants search engine. So depending on your location, depending on your situation, you could be entitled to a grant, but you won't know unless you search for it. And it's also probably important to mention that although you may have searched once, it doesn't mean that later down the line there cannot be like a grant available to you then. It really does depend on when a pot of money has been made available. It's a really, really good website, so do check it out if you haven't already. Okay, so moving on to identifying others who could help. So you've been telling us that as leaders, you often feel tired organising and delivering online activities, which I can relate to. So we need to start linking up with others that can help, which I believe Helen has lightly touched upon. So you could start by talking to your group and ask them to speak with their network. Are there any people that can help with facilitating online group activities? Because sharing the load with others is just going to make things easier down the road. So importantly to remember, tomorrow at 10 a.m, you'll hear from Carol, leader of the Bexhill group, who is linked up with an organisation called Interact. And this is what Helen was mentioning earlier. So Interact Stroke Support is a charity dedicated to supporting stroke recovery and can help with exactly that. They have professional actors read to people affected by stroke to stimulate memory, language, and lift spirits. They are now reading to over 50 stroke clubs across the country, as well as delivering ongoing community projects. Their Interact at Home group service is very flexible and tries to meet the needs of what you and your members are looking for. So group session can last from 40 minutes to an hour, with group activities such as quizzes integrated, as well as story reading. Again, I think Anne is going to kindly put that information into the chat bar for you to take a look at. And the next point I'm going to make is around having a step-by-step approach to supporting people remotely by being flexible and responsive to the needs of group members. So one real life example of taking this step-by-step approach is from someone who started by first having a one-to-one phone call. They then went on to set up a WhatsApp group, and when they were comfortable with that, progressed to a one-on-one Zoom call. So just the two people talking and getting used to the functions of Zoom. They then moved on to having a 3 to 4 people on a Zoom call once they'd become more confident. The point is that we are not all comfortable with using these different technologies or different remote ways of working, but it's really important not to be hard on yourself and take these things really slowly if you are going to approach them. So not to knock your confidence. It's difficult for all of us. So if you'd like guides to do this, then remember to access our club and group resources page, which is on the intranet. It's open access, which is brilliant because it means you don't need to log into it. It's got lots of information on activities to do in your group, shared ideas from leaders across the country, and ways to get connected. There's also useful resources by a coalition of mental health charities that share ideas and tips for group meetings. And again, Anne is kindly going to add that to the chat bar. Okay, so now for my last point, which I won't go into too much detail about because there is a whole session on it as well at 10 tomorrow, where you'll hear the value of connecting with leaders from other groups in your area. So this is a piece of work that I've personally been involved in since before COVID. And in a nutshell, there are so many great things happening in different volunteering and community groups that it's about sharing that knowledge and resource to make managing groups easier for you. So, for example, there have been, during these meetings, there have been people who have had a great experience with being able to recruit new members. And then we've had another group of people who are saying, this has been really challenging for us. And it's bringing those group leaders together to discuss that and find ways around it and work together to find solutions, which has been exceptional work. And this can apply to a whole range of different things, from finding new volunteers to support groups, grant applications, activity ideas. So I'd really highly recommend attending this session tomorrow at 10 a.m. if you can. Okay, so that's everything from me. So I think I'll pass you back to Beth.
Thank you so much, Sophia, Ruth and Helen, for talking us through some of the research findings. So what you out there across your clubs and groups have been telling us are the challenges, and a little bit of work we've done so far to start addressing those challenges. We would love to hear from you in the chat bar if this resonates with you, if this is something that you're feeling is also happening with your club and groups in terms of some of those challenges, if you've tried any of those ideas already, or if you've got different ideas. We would love to hear from you in the chat box. So I think what we'll do is we will bring in the speakers again, and we've got a few questions. So could we have Ruth, Helen and Sophia back with us? That's lovely to see people's faces. Thank you so much. So we've had a question come through from Isabel. I'm going to go to that in 1 minute, Isabel. I'm just going to first of all pick up on if we've got any reflections on if online groups carry on in the future. So we know that quite a few groups have opened up their activities to anyone across the UK. So there's some benefits that we're seeing to online and support. Do you think that face-to-face groups would stop running? What are your thoughts on that? Helen, can I go to you first?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, despite being somebody that works predominantly in digital, I think that face-to-face is paramount. And I think it's one of the most important ways that we as people can meet up and connect. So I always take the approach of like the right tool for the job. And one of the things that did come out during the research was around younger people perhaps feeling like they would like to meet with other young people recovering from a stroke. And sometimes that can be really challenging in a local area. So one of the ideas was that online groups would maybe exist on a more national level, but based around people's interests or their shared characteristics. So having a young person's national group, or potentially having a regional young person's group as well, with those face-to-face groups still remaining for those that want to attend them. And then they also have the choice to join online groups as well. So yeah, face-to-face I think will very, very much continue, and I'm sure everybody's really looking forward to getting those started again.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Has anyone else got any reflections on that point in terms of the mix of support through online and face-to-face? Because we know some groups are thinking, well, when we do finally meet again next year, I want to check if my venue has got Wi-Fi so that we could be running a session together, both in the venue and with people dialing in. Yeah, is there any other reflections from the research you've seen, Ruth, or anything from the work you've been doing, Sophia, in this project? I'll go to you first, Ruth.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I think people seemed excited about having started to use these new technologies in a lot of ways. And I think, for myself included, this has been a time when we've been using things that we wouldn't normally to connect with other people. And I think it would be a shame to lose that. And it has it's overcome a lot of barriers for a lot of people. I'm not sure how, in principle, it would work having some people remotely and other people meeting in a big hall, because sometimes that can be difficult in terms of sound. But in terms of connecting people during the week in between those face-to-face meetings, it might actually create a stronger sense of community among some groups if they can do that. And they thankfully learned to do that more through this kind of awful situation. So I think it's had some good outcomes, this digital focus.
Thank you, Ruth.
I also think there's something quite powerful about being able to connect people based on common interests and not necessarily their locality. And I think we've seen amazing benefits of being able to bring people together face to face, but it does have its limitations. So it could be like a group of people, for example, or people with common interests that just want to be connected in that way. And I think that's really important for some people, not to mention there are a multitude of barriers that people have to face when having to physically travel to somewhere. So I definitely will always see the benefits of face-to-face, but definitely because of what's happened in recent events. For me, being able to meet remotely, being able to meet online, digitally, I think it is here to stay for some people. And it's just something that we need to integrate. We need to have the best of both.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really good. And just pulling in a question that's come in from Brian from Malden. Hi, Brian. Has asked an interesting question about how you integrate and welcome a new member into your virtual group activities. So picking up on your point, Helen, about one of those key challenges is welcoming new people who haven't got established friendships within the group, how to create that human connection still when they're coming to that group as very unknown. Was there anything that was coming out in your research or your interviews on how people may have done that?
Yeah, sure. So there's two different ways of looking at this, depending on the members' digital confidence. So we had looked at what integrating a new member that's not digitally confident would look like, and it involved a lot of time with them, either on the phone, and gradually building up their digital confidence to join that online group. So it might start a telephone, and then it might be sitting in on a Zoom call, but maybe not saying anything, right up to meeting the entire group. So we recognized that it was a long process. It wasn't just a click this link and come on in, and that they would need a lot of reassurance. So that was for the people that maybe lacked digital confidence. For those that were digitally confident, it was around trying to meet up with them on a one-to-one basis online, so either through calls or video calls. And then the ability for them to sit in on Zoom meetings, maybe turn their cameras off, maybe just get a sense of how the meeting runs, the different personalities, and then being introduced later down the line. But yeah, it was recognised as being a lot more challenging than you would do in a face-to-face, where you'd greet them at the door, you'd offer them a coffee, you'd do all of those nice human things that you do to make people feel comfortable and welcome. So it's about, trying to understand how we can create that online as well.
Thank you. It's really useful. Sophia, any reflections from any groups you've worked with in how they've managed to create that integration?
I think one of the things we've been looking at as well is, because it is new to all of us, supporting in the facilitation of groups. It doesn't come naturally to all of us how we can welcome somebody and make them and have that human connection online. So we really appreciate that. So we are looking at doing some training to help us overcome that. You know, as Helen said, when I worked as a stroke recovery coordinator, when somebody felt like they wanted to be integrated to a new group that they weren't sure about, you know, you could have that moment where you bring them in, and as Helen said, have that coffee and that individual chat with people. So it is definitely certainly more tricky, but it is something that we're thinking about, and we'll actively try to change and try to think about ways to connect people. But yeah, I think some good facilitation for training for all of us would be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that. Oh yeah, please, Ruth.
Sorry, there's a bit of a time there, guys. I wonder if there's from the findings suggesting that contact between members themselves is always great, and a couple of people suggesting that maybe a kind of buddying system might be possible. And so I wonder if the new members, it kind of works similarly, but actually having one-to-one phone calls, as Helen said, is actually quite important as a starting block, so that when in a group context, they don't feel like it's totally unfamiliar. And if everybody's buddying, it's not like they're being singled out. It's just a really nice way of welcoming people. But yeah, I'm sure that's probably what a lot of groups have been doing already, just kind of plodding on and doing a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's what I mentioned earlier about having that step-by-step approach and integrating that into the ways that we actually introduce people into our group. So it could be, as you've said, having that phone call, just that one-on-one phone call, perhaps with a group leader and a member, somebody who wants to join, and then taking it that step further. Maybe you could integrate them into a WhatsApp group if there was a way to connect that way. And maybe when people are posting things, you're seeing you could pick up on shared interests and things like that. So yeah, lots of things to consider.
Thank you both. Yeah, and I think there's a real feeling on the call today that members are just desperate to get back to face-to-face meetings. And while we absolutely understand that, we know it's not something that's going to happen immediately. So is there something about how to inspire people to be a fan of digital, to be a fan of being online, and what it means for that person's whole life not just in terms of accessing a stroke group, but being able to talk to family, friends, having access to the world on the internet. Is there something about how we can support and inspire people to want to be digital? What are your thoughts on that? If I go to Helen first.
Yeah, sure. So it's a really interesting question, because when people are digitally excluded, so they can't get online, it doesn't just mean that they can't access online support groups. It means that they can't access online banking. It means that they can't do food deliveries to their house. It means that if you're in work, you don't get access to the best jobs because you cannot find them online. It means that you can't look around and find out the cheapest prices for things because you're looking for stuff in a shop. So you end up paying more for things. Like, actually not being online is the kind of new massive inequality of this age that we definitely need to sort. So I'm inspired by online all the time. I think it is just mind blowing that I can have a FaceTime conversation with somebody halfway across the world. I remember when I used to go on holiday to Spain, 10 years ago, and you'd be like, right, I'm away on holiday for 2 weeks and I'm not going to speak to you because it's so expensive, and you just completely go off grid. And that doesn't happen anymore because the power of digital. So I think there is something about inspiring, but also making it really relevant to people as well, who doesn't like to save money, who doesn't like convenience in their life. So maybe that's an approach that can be taken as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts from group and club perspective, if this work around inspiration and how we talk about being online beyond the group would help. So do let us know if that resonates for you. We've had a question in about the group buddy. So I know you mentioned that, Ruth, in terms of the research that you did around being able to connect members together more. So volunteers and those leading groups don't feel they have to take that all on themselves, because it can be really tiring. So how do we enable more peer support, but on a one-to-one basis? And yeah, the group buddy sounds good, but what about GDPR implications? And in terms of that, we did create some guidance, which Ruth alluded to, which is on our club and group resources page. And it's about how you can connect members together one-to-one in a way that meets data protection laws. So we'll share that link with you, and we'll also make sure we get that out to you in other ways. So just let us know. I hope that answers the question. And if anyone is doing phone trees or buddy systems already, then please do let us know in the chat bar. Wonderful. And there was another question around examples of offline support that was provided to members over the lockdown period. So we heard earlier today from Michelle in Northern Ireland, who predominantly is supporting people through those traditional methods of post, phone call, newsletters, sharing pictures of each other's lives, rather than necessarily an online 20 people in an activity together. Was there anything you found out in your research, Helen, of other examples of sort of offline support that we could be championing?
Yeah, definitely. I have a really good example of a volunteer group leader that I spoke to that was based in the north of England. And a lot of the members of that group, for all the challenges presented earlier, they couldn't access online, they didn't have devices. So how could they reach them? And the group came up with a really great idea, which was using WhatsApp for the volunteers to communicate with each other. identify those members that were shielding in the group and creating their own mutual aid support group where they went and got shopping and different things for those members that were shielding and dropped them off at their house, which I just thought was such a lovely idea. And it was a really interesting example because it used digital to support those members, but not in the way that we think about digital. Like the WhatsApp group was the communication tool for the volunteers, and then they went and delivered that offline support. So that could have also been done by phone calls. It didn't need to be done by WhatsApp, but I thought it was a really great, relevant example of the types of things that people needed during the lockdown period.
Thank you. It's really helpful. Was there anything that came out, Ruth, in the lockdown survey around being able to support offline?
I think predominantly a lot of the support was offline in terms of telephone calls. And I think people are realistic. They know that we were in a lockdown situation and there is a limit to the face-to-face or kind of non-digital support we can offer each other. But I think it still seemed to mean a lot to people. So lots of people kind of mention the terms like we keep in touch, we check up on each other. And I think those regular phone calls to know that somebody is thinking of you and there's somebody you could ask for help if you did need it is actually really important. People mentioned sharing birthdays as a celebration. If somebody's going through a loss, sharing those difficult times too. And I think spreading that kind of beyond getting that support from the leaders to a wider member group would be absolutely wonderful to know that they have a whole group of people that they could call upon if needed, even though we are restricted in what we can do for each other.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Thank you so much. And I know there's obviously things around boundaries when using phone calls or setting up WhatsApp groups. So we've got guidance as well on that, haven't we, Sophia, around the WhatsApp and things like that. So do check out our club and group resources page, which can help you manage some of that, because what's important is, as volunteers, you don't feel you have to answer messages at 11 o'clock at night. That's not what you that's not always what's helpful for you or the other person. So there's definitely that boundary setting. And we've had a comment from Mandy Jones. Thank you, Mandy. We do have to recognise that some people are just not wanting to learn online, and we need to respect that and not make them feel bad about it. It's a really good, interesting reflection. Does anyone want to come in and sort of speak to that point?
Yeah, I can. I think it's really important, and I'm really glad that you've raised it. And I think that's why planning to get the face-to-face groups back up and running in 2021 is so important. And yeah, we do need to accept that there will be people that can't use online, but on the other side of that, there will be people that won't. As long as the level of support that they are getting is as much or greater than online support, then we just need to make that clear.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think we've come to the end of the questions. I don't know if we can bring Anne back in for just a couple of minutes to give us a flavour of the types of discussions that have maybe been going on the public chat box. Hi, Anne.
Hello. Yes, we've had some really nice comments and things coming in. People very supportive, and they're understanding the difficulties that other clubs and groups are having, being able to connect with some of their members who don't use technology. Kathy Butcher has actually raised that even before COVID, with the inclemental weather, sometimes it did mean it was difficult for members to get to group. So a mix of face-to-face and remote activities could be an answer for the future. Lucy Thomas, who we heard from earlier on with Striker Called Choir, she said that by doing things online has given them a great opportunity to invite further people to attend their choir, but she does appreciate that face-to-face does work better for some, and again they hope to have a mix of the two. And finally, Colin Lyle from Brighton Say Aphasia, he was sharing some of the apps that they use. He says a lot of their group members can't speak, read or write because they have aphasia, but they do use some apps that incorporate voice recognition from the iPad, and that's been a great help for their online activities.
Wonderful, thank you. Sounds very active in the chat box, and I love the way it's about sharing all of your expertise together to help the wider network. So wonderful, and we'll be able to get a copy of all of that information in the chat box so it won't be lost. We'll make sure we capture it as well as we move forward. Thanks, Anne. We did have one more comment from Alan that came in that would be quite good to address. So from Stowmarket, welcome Alan. We surveyed our members with phones and none of them had smartphones, and even some who had quite cheap ones but didn't know how to use them. So there's something we've got to do within this project, and this response is, as you've talked about, both Ruth and Helen and Sophia, around access. And we've talked about our grants and our helpline, and Sophia talked about Turn to You, or what was it? Was it Turn?
Sorry, Turn to Us.
Turn to Us. So there are those types of avenues. What are people's reflections on access to technology, but then also wanting to access technology? There are two things, aren't there? Do people have any final sort of closing thoughts on that dynamic between the two things, not having equipment and then, as Mandy had said, not wanting to use digital, and what we can do in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people have the motivation and they want to join us digitally, then we will support with that. We've got grants, we've got guidance, and we should be doing everything we can to, as Helen mentioned, reduce that inequality with technology. But again, as we've said, if people do not want to wish to join us digitally on online platforms, that is okay, and it's also our responsibility to support them in that too. So that would be my statement. Thanks,
Sophia. Helen, were you wanting to come in? Oh, Ruth. Ruth, you jump in.
This isn't from research at all. This is just from own experience of a relative with motor neuron. And just saying that sometimes it's about getting the advice from organisations like Reason Digital and other accessible organisations that can help you know what to start with teaching, because sometimes you could try teaching somebody the technologies you use, but they're actually quite complicated. And there's some that are way more accessible in terms of phones, iPads and computers. And so I think, yeah, as the Stroke Association, having guidance on which things have been shown to be more accessible and a good place to start is great. And yeah, hopefully that's the sort of guidance that can be given to the groups.
Thank you, Ruth. And as a closing, I suppose, from the work that's all been going on across the University of Exeter and Reason Digital, there will be a report and recommendations that we will share with you through the wider network. So it's not just about today's 1 hour webinar. We will make sure that you get that information when we've consolidated it and finished the programs. So yeah, thank you so much for your support today, talking us through that, Ruth, Helen and Sophia, much appreciated. We will make sure we get this session up on our website. I know there was quite a lot of information in there, especially during Sophia's slide around what you can do now. So we'll make sure that you get access to that so you can catch up later. So before you leave for lunch, I'm sure everyone's tummies are rumbling. Please remember that we do have our final day tomorrow. It's gone so quickly, starting at 10 a.m. The first session is learning how to connect with other leaders in your community to share ideas, best practice and get support. We've heard quite a lot about that already through the sessions these last few days. So come and hear from group leaders who are doing that and connecting locally and hear the benefits from it. And also the final plug before you go, we have a lovely social event planned for tomorrow starting around 7:15, quizzes, choirs, music, celebration. And that is open to all of your members in your groups as well. So Anne will share the link for that. Please do encourage people who are able to sign up, and hopefully it will be a good party. So we'll see you bright and early tomorrow at 10. Thank you so much.